Right.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. This is the inaugural first episode of the Black Scholar channel. I'm with my buddy, the African Wahala, and we're having a show about Africa's new debt crisis. Say
Yes.
something to the people, Wahala.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you for having me on your show, Black Scholar. We've known each other for a while, and it's good when, um, Africans from both sides of the pond commune and talk about African issues and potential solutions. So, thank you for having me.
Yes, yes, and I appreciate it. This brother here has been a library worth of information, a treasure trove of information on what's going on in the continent, especially in West Africa, specifically Nigeria. If it wasn't for him, I don't think I really would have stood the intricacies of Nigerian society and why it is the way it is, and why so many Nigerians have left the country in search of a better life.
Yeah.
So this brother is really understanding that, and it's uh, it's been very informative. And coming from a Western point of view, a Western background, you just don't understand what's going on in Africa. You see it, from the way it's been presented to you in a Western mindset, and you judge the situation that way. And I don't think that's the best way to do it. So it's good to have someone who has a different perspective, who's from the continent. I've been to the continent, but that's not the same with someone who's actually from the continent and grew up there. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, do you want to add anything else? Do you want to talk about anything in the news real quick as far as Africa or Nigeria?
Yeah, there's always something interesting going on in Africa. For the longest time, we continental Africans, we had, I wouldn't say every one of us, but it was a huge misconception. We had a misconception about Africans from America, especially, and even the Caribbean islands. We thought about them in a different way. And it's all about the media. The media spreads propaganda and indoctrinates us to think a certain way. But we are glad that these days social media is giving us that avenue to, learn more about things, understand people better, and we are slowly building relationships, building bridges and all that. Also, as far as news in Nigeria, Nigeria recently had another election, a president sworn in, actually highly controversial. In Uganda, they signed an anti LGBTQ law, what's it called, legislation into law, and it's causing a ruse in America. The American government, in my opinion, extremely hypocritical, telling the Ugandans to adhere to certain, immoral ways of doing things. When African countries already have so many problems, we don't need to add more immorality to what we're going through. And also in South Africa, it's been one of the best African countries for the longest time. But these days, it looks like South Africa is slowly experiencing a decline, I would say. So, yeah, those are some things that are going on in Africa that I can tell.
And I just want to add to the whole Uganda situation, and just in general, they've been pounding on this since the Obama era, trying to promote LGBT values in Africa. I
Yeah.
respect everybody's right to exist, and I right people's right to love, but just like you don't want people proselytizing you with religious, whether it be Christian or more or Muslim fundamentalism, we don't need LGBT fundamentalism. Okay,
Yeah.
and we have problems here. And I said you have dozens of states that abandon trans rights. So
Hmm.
how can you talk about what they should do in Africa when you got the same problem in your own backyard, Joe Biden? So that's my thought on that. Um, Let me step away real quick. If you want to add something else for the next few minutes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean that's it, man. I'm gonna tell you one more thing though. That one more thing is, I lost. I was feeling quite sad. I wouldn't say depressed, but I was quite sad about the way the agenda was, took so much power in the last couple of years. I believe in the United States of America, there was an amendment to the Marriage Act, and that was implemented by the Democrats, Obama, Biden, and the rest of them. But what I realized on social media is that majority of Americans are against this craziness. So that just gave me a little bit of hope that, like, if the people in the United States of America are constantly fighting against this insanity, then I'm a little bit hopeful. Because right now, I'll tell you the truth, a lot of people in many African societies believe that it's a part of the American culture and American people have accepted it. But that's not the case. And the fact that that is not the case, it gives me hope that yes, there will be some resolution in the near future.
Okay. So
Yeah.
tonight, I'm gonna get into tonight's show. As I said, is the title of the show is Africa's New Debt Crisis. Now, Africa's been in several debt crises before, uh, probably during slavery, when the colonizers came. They had given each chiefs and princes different debts, and that was a way. Selling slaves was a way to pay off those debts. Then at the end of colonialism, they came up with a new kind of trick. Okay, we something called neo-colonialism, and many of the African countries, in order to develop, started borrowing from the same people they just got the independence from,
Hmm.
like the UK, like France, like Portugal, through these instruments called the International Monetary Fund, the IMF,
Yep.
and the World Bank. And both of them are controlled by the United States and Europe. And all they have done is basically engage in a form of neo-colonialism, where they run the countries from remote control using so-called African leaders or African misleaders, I should call them, to mismanage the country.
Yep.
Okay, so let me start with independence. The first African country to become independent was Ghana in 1957. Many others, including Nigeria, soon followed, but they never truly achieved independence because they were dependent on their former colonial masters for development, trade, and aid. This was facilitated by assassinations, coups, and what is today called debt trap diplomacy.
Hmm.
And what is debt trap diplomacy? It's a style of diplomacy, or a relationship between two different nations where the government of a wealthier nation negotiates loans to a poor country in exchange for that poor country repaying the loans with exports of natural resources in lieu of cash and or access to strategic infrastructure like harbors, ports, airports, major highways, and railroads. The borrowing nation has to hire contractors from the lending nation, often excluding native contractors from competing for these projects. In recent years, China has been accused of this practice, especially in Africa, as if China was the only one doing it. But that's what they want to say. The Western governments, including the United States, have long been guilty of this practice, and this is just their way of criticizing China, whom they view as a rival for world domination.
Hmm.
You want to comment on that real quick?
Yes, yes. I mean, we've seen that play out recently with the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They have an alliance as far as economic, um, I guess, collaboration. Um, and then the United States came in the picture and tried to break that alliance simply because the United States is enemies with China. I wouldn't even say they are enemies. They're just competitors, with Russia. Russia is not a competitor. I'm sorry to say. Russia is not on the level of the United States. The only advantage that Russia might have is the military nuclear bombs, and that's it. But China is fast growing. It's a competitor with the United States. It's slowly catching up, and I believe it's going to overtake, especially with some weird social policies that the United States, the Democratic Party, has implemented in the last couple of years. So, yeah, with that being said, United States always tries to come in when an African country is trying to establish relationship with another global power. because it feels threatened. We've seen that recently with Uganda, with South Africa, with Ghana, So yeah, it's just part of the strategies of the United States and its Western allies.
Right. Okay. So then the next thing I want to talk about, in 98, 97, 99, 2000, there was something called the Jubilee 2000. It was a project based out of the UK. They really took off in 1998 and it spread to the United States and other countries. And what it was supposed to do was relieve the crushing debt burdens of the world's poorest countries by hundreds of billions of dollars. And it was to end in the year 2000 to coincide with the Great Jubilee celebration of the Roman Catholic Church.
Hmm.
This practice was based on the Jubilee practice in the Old Testament of the Bible, where every 7 years the debts of the poor were forgiven and the slaves were freed. Um, have you heard about this?
I haven't heard about it. Now that you're talking about it, I just opened Google and I'm trying to skim through any information I can find. But yeah, that sounds very familiar. I remember in 1999, Obasanjo became
Right,
the president of
right,
Nigeria. And then in 2000, 2001, he traveled around multiple European countries, the United States of America, asking for debt forgiveness from the Paris Club. I believe the Paris Club is
right,
maybe defunct or it's no longer as functional as it was, or maybe it was replaced by the IMF or something. But yes, Obasanjo did what he could. He brought down the debt of Nigeria, but unfortunately, even though that was a good move by Obasanjo, he allowed some negativity creep into his administration, and then he lost his credibility eventually. But yeah, the debt forgiveness in poorer countries, I remember Obasanjo implemented that in 2000, 2001.
right. So let me continue with it. So African nations were greatly impacted by the Jubilee 2000 campaign. Unfortunately, many of them, including Nigeria, have since racked up more debt than they had in the 1990s, particularly with China, which began extending credit to many developing countries in 2000. So right as they got out of it from the West, they got right back in with China, as well as some of the other Western powers. So it just seems like uh, these African misleaders never seem to learn their lesson. You know,
Nope.
you get from under the man's yoke and then you turn right around and get back into debt. So I don't understand it, but so that's what happened in 2000. And the reason that I brought this up because I remember this. You talked about Obasanjo. He just become president in '99, but I remember this um, here in the Jubilee for a year or two around at the early part of this century, and how all these African countries got their debts wiped out. As well as Middle Eastern and Latin American countries, and to see that them go right back into this same trap,
Hmm.
it really was heartbreaking, and that's why it really inspired me. And then the reason I decided to do this show, we've been talking about it for about a month or two, was because I saw what was going on in Ghana. You know,
Yeah.
the current administration under the APP party
Nana Akufo-Addo.
of Akufo-Addo, um, he ran on not going back to the IMF. He had criticized his predecessor's regime for doing it, and here he is in 2022, a year to the day, uh, you know, asking for a new loan from the
Yep.
IMF, restructuring the IMF debt. And so, Ghana has, just like most African countries, does not have much of a tax base. Most of its money comes from outside of the country. If it's either in the form of remittances from people in the diaspora, or those are people. When I say diaspora, for those who don't know, diaspora means people who are of a certain country's descent or continent's descent, and they live outside of their country or continent's geographical boundaries. So you have Ghanaians of people of Ghanaian descent sending billions of dollars every year in remittances. Those are payments to their family members and businesses in Ghana. And then you have people who, then you have them borrowing money from foreign, either
Yep.
private banks or companies, the export import bank, or the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. The International Monetary Fund is based in Paris,
Yep.
and then the World Bank is based in Washington D.C. So so that's how that goes. I mean, they don't raise enough money in tax. They tried to do something last year with the digital tax, and that just collapsed because people stopped using it. Because in Africa, people pay for things with their cell phone.
Hmm.
It's kind of with MTN and mobile, they had mobile money. We do Snap, Cash App and Venmo and stuff here, but that's still not the most common way of digital or electronic cash payments. In Africa, they use actual mobile money, and they pay
Yep.
all their bills and buy stuff with it if they don't use the cash. And that caused people to stop doing it because they didn't want to pay a tax on it. Yeah, I think it was like 1.5% uh, 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 rate, but people stopped doing it, so they weren't able to raise the money that they expected. And because of COVID, that really slowed down things now. After the year return that they had was very successful in 2019, which I went to
Yep.
Ghana then, um, they weren't able to build on momentum because COVID slowed all flights and travel and trips there.
Yes.
And then you had to shut the economy down. Everybody around the world shut their economies down, which hurt. Was a self-inflicted wound. So the government of Ghana was not able to pay its bills or pay its workers to the extent that it should have. So that's why they had, Akufo-Addo had to go and hand in hand to the IMF. So that's what made me really surprise me, and you know that's what made me inspired me to write this, do this video.
And
You got any
let
comments
me
on that?
let me add to this. So, you spoke about remittances. I just want people to have an idea how insane the dynamics are. So, Nigerians, I'm speaking about Nigeria now, for example, about 200 million population. Nigerians are the most populous Africans in the world. And Nigerians are pretty much the Chinese of the black race. So you
Right,
find Nigerians in every single part of the world,
right,
including Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Alaska, anywhere. Maybe I wouldn't be surprised if you find a Nigerian in Antarctica. I will not be surprised.
right.
But
They're like the Jews of Africa because they are very business savvy and very willing to travel to any length to find opportunities economically.
it's crazy. I recently seen a Nigerian Russian sailor that sailed from Russia all the way to the Bering Strait. That's the border between Alaska and Russia, and he was the first black person to sail a boat to that part of the world. But anyways, as far as remittances are concerned, in 2021, Nigerians in diaspora sent home $95 billion to their family members. And $95 billion is way more than the national budget. So Nigerians in diaspora are contributing more money to the economy of Nigeria than the budget of Nigeria. That's how serious it is. Just wanted to put that out there.
What was the number? 95 billion.
$95 billion.
Yeah, I agree. The same thing with Ghana. The same thing with many third world countries, many developing countries, particularly on the African continent. So yeah, so
Insane.
so remittances are a very big part. If they didn't have it, those governments would collapse.
Yes.
Okay, it's not like the United States or in Canada where they have an income tax, other forms of taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, where the governments can, and then bonds that they can sell that the governments can use to finance their internal affairs. Yes, America borrows money from overseas, but it's not dependent on it like it is foreign African countries.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me continue. So this is the situation, the current situation, and I was just looking at the 10 most indebted countries, African countries to China. Number one was Angola at $25 billion.
Hmm.
Angola is Africa's largest oil producer, probably one of the world's largest. oil producers, even more than Nigeria. A lot of that money, a lot of the oil that they export to China is to pay off its debt.
Hmm.
But they're not even getting revenue for that. It's to pay off previous debts. The next country is Ethiopia. They owe $13 billion to Chinese
Wow.
banks. Um, and that's mainly for development and infrastructure. China has really been, like I told you, been focusing on key industries, not just trying to get in and out like the United States, just quick money. They focus on the long term, rail, roads, bridges, electric, harbors. They won't have military bases and stuff, police stations. They do all kinds of stuff for African countries that African governments should be doing themselves.
Yeah.
Uh, and the third country that's most dependent on, has the most debt with China is Kenya at 7.9 billion, and this was mostly done under the previous president Uhuru Kenyatta, and often a lot of it, like a lot of it's tied to corruption. These African governments overspend beyond their means, and they were willing to sell their country out to different Chinese firms or different American or foreign firms. They'll take bribes. So the sale project is worth $5 billion.
Hmm.
2 billion will go get kicked back to the African country. They borrowed the 5 billion from the IMF or from the Bank of China or whomever. 2 billion will get kicked back to the leadership, and then 3 billion will be used to pay the Chinese contractor or the American contractor or the French contractor. And the work is done is poor because they're not getting the full value for it. You understand?
Yeah.
So um, then the next country, and then that's why I'm going back to Kenyatta, who's the son of Jomo Kenyatta, who's the first president of Kenya under independence um, from the British in the 1960s. He stood trial some years ago at the International Criminal Court and was acquitted. And as far as I know, he's definitely the only African leader who's been to the ICC that's been acquitted and allowed to go back home. And the others, there may be some other people that have been acquitted, but I'm not aware of. But the ICC in The Hague in the Netherlands has been on African leaders like flies on poop, and they have just locking them up all kinds of ways. So the fact that he got out, he had to have promised them something.
Yep.
And I think it was because of, right after he got out last year or 2 years ago, that Kenya issued a $1 billion or $2 billion euro bond. It's in euros, but that's the value of it in US dollars. And so now they got all this debt. You see,
Yeah.
um, the next country, the number four is the Republic of Congo, not the Democratic Republic of Congo, but the Republic of Congo is a lot smaller neighbor.
Yeah.
Chinese bank $7.5 billion. That's just Chinese. You're not talking about American or French or British or anybody else. And we're not even talking about domestic debt either. We're just talking about debt just to one nation. The Zambia is number five.
Oh yeah.
It owes 6.5 billion to Chinese lenders, and it's one of the poorest countries in the world with over
Yep.
60% of its population in poverty. And I'm going to talk more about Zambia, but they're basically collapsing. They too had to renegotiate a the IMF deal because the IMF was like, no, we're not going to give you any money because you haven't shown you've been managed the money we give you.
Hmm.
So, and so now they got a new deal. I'm gonna probably go into a little detail about that a little later on in the show. Another country is Sudan, and I'm not sure which Sudan they're talking about. I guess the Muslim Sudan, the
Yeah. Yeah.
northern part.
It's the North Sudan,
You know what I'm
the
saying? Yeah,
one in current crisis.
right. So this was from last year. So this is who knows where it is stands now, but it was 6.4 billion. And they were saying because the country is rich in mineral resources, but war torn. And like I said, it's a civil war going on right now. But the previous governor, current government that's in battle right now owes China 6.4 billion. You should be interested about this. Is your boy, Paul Biya's government, Cameroon. They're number seven. They owe Chinese 5.5 billion.
Uh,
And this is due to high levels of corruption and mismanagement of funds.
that's it.
And Paul B has been running that country almost 40 years.
Yep.
We can't blame nobody but him.
Yep. It's going on 41 years now.
41
Nobody
years.
but him. Extremely divided country, social infrastructure gone. People dislike one another based on their foreign adopted languages. The
Right.
English and the French
That
speaking Cameroonians
the war with each
are
other.
in disagreement.
Right.
It's a mess.
Right.
Paul Biya made a mess in Cameroon. I hope he ends up in prison, my opinion.
I hope it's in Cameroon and not in the Hague. He need to deal with it.
Yeah.
Not he doesn't need to be in Lux. He needs to be in the same squalor he helped create.
Yes.
Um, the next country is Nigeria. That's number 8 at 4.8 billion. That was a year ago, so I don't know what it is now. Uh, and that's again attributed to corruption, mainly.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's probably still around the same amount because the Nigerian government rail projects were the main should I say beneficiaries of the Chinese loans because they constructed a rail line between Abuja and Kaduna. If you remember, there was a news in 2021 about Boko Haram attacking a rail line between Abuja and Kaduna.
right.
Yes, that was one of the loans that Nigeria took from the Chinese, and then there was another railway infrastructure constructed between Apapa Seaport in Lagos through Lagos to Abeokuta and ends up in Ibadan. So yes, and they are standard guard rail projects. They aren't like bullet rails or anything, the latest type of technology. No, it's the regular stuff that was created in the 80s. And this is what the Nigerian government took so much loan in establishing. But I don't want to sound too pessimistic. That's what it was.
Um, number 9 is Ghana at 3.5 billion. Um, Ghana is mineral rich, has oil, has natural gas, gold, what we called the Gold Coast at one time. That's when they still make the exports. Timber, bauxite, which is the ore for aluminum, and cocoa, is the world's number 2 cocoa producer after Ivory Coast. Okay, so and then lastly is the Democratic Republic of Congo, the former Zaire, and their debt to China is 3.4 billion. And because that country is so war torn and so dysfunctional,
Yeah.
China has asked the DRC to pay it back in precious minerals like coltan, which DRC
Yeah.
is the world's number one producer of coltan, which you use to power your cell phone.
Yeah.
70% of the world's coltan comes from just this one country. The country, the river there produces hydroelectricity. There's so many resources there: coal, natural gas, oil, all so many things. It by
Yes.
itself should be the richest country, if
In the
not in the
world.
world, at least in Africa.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. I agree. In
Instead of
Africa, at least.
poorest country in the world. China has asked for those precious resources and natural resources in exchange for cash payments. So, you know, the, yeah, they've replaced the Belgians and the others with the Chinese now as their master. So it's sad, and it was so sad because it could have been what they got Kabila out, not Kabila, but Mobutu out of there. After he was a parasite for 30, 40 years.
You know what's so disgraceful about Mobutu Sese Seko? Mobutu ended up passing away in Morocco because he was on exile. And
I thought it was
how could you be the president of a country for 30 something years? You were a multi billionaire. You used your money and your influence to stage one of the biggest boxing matches in the history of boxing,
almost
Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman in Zaire back then in the 70s.
right.
Very influential guy. And then you ended up running away from your country. You died in a foreign country because you couldn't go back to your country. I mean, if that's not disgraceful, I don't know what else is, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I agree totally. He stole $8 billion. $8 billion, and and then his successors stole even more. You know, Kabila. I can't. son, not the father, but Lauren Kabila. I think it's Paul Kabila stole even more, um, and has been a force for foreign interest ever since. And now
Hmm.
whoever is his successor is doing the same thing. Asking Belgium to come back and uh, help them out after they killed 10 million Congolese people,
Yep.
you know, and funded that country for over a century. Uh, so then the next country, so that's that. So then what really got me, I want to start with do a look at Zambia.
Zambia.
Zambia. So Zambia was known as Northern Rhodesia. It was part of the British colony that named after Cecil Rhodes. The Rhodes Scholarship is named after this man plundered South Africa, was now Zimbabwe, or Southern Rhodesia, and now Zambia. And he made a fantastic fortune. And he was one of the founders of the Beers mining company, diamond mining company. Okay, that's how he was able to establish it. He was able to come to Africa, basically after leaving Cambridge, setting up shop, becoming governor of South Africa, and then going on up, and then he was able to get a monopoly on diamonds and gold, and that's where here we are 120, 130, 140 years later. That's how these countries got these companies got established, and that's where the Cambridge, where he went to school, they get well, not Cambridge, Oxford. Excuse me, he was Oxford. The whole Rhodes Scholarship, that money is paid with blood diamonds.
Hmm.
Okay. Anyway, so Zambia's relationship with China began shortly after its independence from Britain in 1964, October 1964. The Chinese, under Chairman Mao Zedong, offered diplomatic relationship and infrastructure development assistance. See, that's key.
Yes.
Almost 60 years ago, they were doing that in Zambia. The Chinese take the long view. They knew that they were going to colonize Africa. They were willing to wait. See, and so Zambia, what's going on in Zambia? You got Chinese doing going there, dirt poor, come there, become instant millionaires, building factories and roads and all that kind of stuff. They obviously having relationships with the women and getting them pregnant, so you got all these illegitimate children. They
Hmm.
have roads that Zambians can't go on, only Chinese. Okay, it's a very, very. The government is willing to tolerate it, but the people are suffering, um, and that's true in many of these African countries. These leadership have allowed these foreigners to exploit their own people because they do, and they don't seem to care. At least with the white man, he said, or whomever, they'll say you can we'll exploit our people, but you got to pay us to do it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
You can't just
Yes.
do it. You got to pay us. You can't go in China and abuse our people. You pay us, and then we'll do what we want to do. So anyway, so as of a year ago, Zambia's total debt was $32.5 billion. I mean, yeah, that was the total debt, including and foreign debt was more than half of that at 17.5 billion. Since 2020, the small landlocked country, Southern African nation, has been trying to renegotiate its loans with foreigners, particularly with the International Monetary Fund and China. I'm going to show you a quick video of what's going on in the Zambia, and you can go from there. So
Okay.
your audio system. So, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Zambia's
Can you
finance
hear it?
minister said
Yes.
this Wednesday.
Let me turn it up a little bit.
Zambia's finance minister said this Wednesday that the country is working hard with creditors, including China, in order to agree a debt restructuring by the end of March or shortly afterwards. According to Situmbeku Musot China, Zambia's largest bilateral creditor, was being engaged on the debt restructuring with bilateral engagements on an almost weekly basis. Zambia's external debt stood at $14.87 billion at the end of June 2022, the minister had said previously. Chinese lenders accounted for almost $6 billion worth of debt at the end of 2021, according to government data. Zambia was the first African country to default on its sovereign debt during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, but the restructuring of its external debts has been greatly delayed.
So you see that. Let me stop sharing. Hmm. Okay. All right. So as you can see, that country is crashing under the weight of its debt. Okay.
Yes.
Um, it's a like I say, it's a very poor country. I don't think it has the same mineral resources as its neighbor, um, uh, Zimbabwe, which is also part of Rhodesia. And so, and you know what happened with Zimbabwe. I mean, Mugabe and all the sanctions that the
Yep.
United States and the West have put on that country, that poor country. So I mean, but it's either that's the situation we find ourselves. Whether we fight them or go along with them, we find ourselves in the same position, in poverty and under their heat. So
I mean, honestly, the debt traps that African countries keep falling into, it's quite sad. It's ridiculous. Um, I can see what a relationship between an African country and China or any other powerful country could yield if it was properly managed and if it was created with good intentions. But for the most part, that's not what it is. And unfortunately, a lot of irresponsible, unscrupulous politicians simply sign away the future of these African countries without properly, investigating or considering the end result on the people. And the reason why it's easy for them to sign off those ridiculous death trap contracts is because they are millionaires. The politicians themselves, they get paid millions regardless what happens. I mean, for example, if Zambia was a serious country, what it should have done was cut down the spending on their politicians, because you find these politicians are all wealthy, living in opulence, but the vast majority of the population are living in extreme poverty. But then, if you're trying to create equity in the society, wouldn't it have made more sense to maybe cut down the spending on these government officials, reduce the amount of vehicles in their convoys? I know it's not as bad as it is in Zambia as it is in Nigeria. In Nigeria, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's crazy in Nigeria. But in Zambia, they can still implement some, reduction in spending in government, unnecessary government spendings, as opposed to, signing off their countries into unscrupulous entities like China. We all know none of these countries really give a damn about African countries or Africans. What they care about is their own selves. They care about their people, and they care about finding a place to resettle their billions of population. I mean, the Chinese have almost 2 billion people currently in Africa. There are maybe, I wouldn't be surprised if we have 100, close to 100 million Chinese in Africa. I will not be surprised, because there are so many Chinese people and they have to go somewhere. China is not big enough for them. They end up in Africa and many other continents, and we fall for the traps that they set for us. I mean, it's just unfortunate. It's crazy. It would have made more sense if these governments cut down on their unnecessary government expenditure as opposed to putting the countries in useless debt.
oh no, man, I as a Nigerian senator, I deserve between 50,000 and $80,000 a month.
I mean,
A U.S. senator only makes 150,000 a year.
I mean,
So, you know,
brother, do you know that the Nigerian average governor, no, I would say the senators make $30,000 a month
right?
in a poor country.
And the minimum,
A poor country, bro. A country that has nothing. I mean, we're not supposed to be poor, but we are poor, and that's the stark reality. So if a poor country mismanages the amount of money spent on politicians, and that's just the senators, the governors, 36 governors make double of what the senators make. And that's just basic salary. These guys are rogues. They just waste money. They have convoys with 50 vehicles. I'm talking about vehicles manufactured in America, V8 engines that consume high volume of diesel. They drive those vehicles on Nigerian roads, convoys. One governor has 35, 40 car convoys. President, 60 car convoys. Bulletproof Mercedes Benz manufactured in Germany. Each car costs maybe $500,000. Ridiculous. These guys are just wasting money. All they care about is, and the biggest slap on our face is the fact that each one of these politicians, senators, governors, presidents, etc., they don't even believe in the countries because if they did, their children will not be living abroad. They wouldn't be using the medical infrastructure in London, in America, and all these foreign countries. But that's just what it is. So the clear evidence is mismanagement as a result of terrible leadership, corrupt politicians, and we just have to find a solution to this. It's been going on before I was born, and it's still going on till this day. So,
yeah. All right. So let me continue. So that was Zambia. I'm gonna go to Nigeria. To Nigeria, and we talk about Nigeria all the time. So I'm gonna go back and talk about the history of Nigeria's uh, debt crisis before uh, now. I'm going to start with Shehu Shagari, who was the first civilian elected president in Nigeria. He was elected in, I want to say, 1979, from 1979 to 1983. And he was the leader of the so-called Second Republic. Under Shagari, the Nigerian economy underwent a structural adjustment where the IMF demanded that many government companies become privatized and sold off to foreigners in order to pay their debts. There was a recession, and in 1982, the government of Nigeria borrowed 1.5 billion naira, which at the time was more than the United States dollar. So 1.5 billion naira was approximately 2.2 billion US dollars
hmm,
from the IMF, and then they borrowed another $4 million from 4 million naira, or $594 million from Saudi Arabia. Okay, so this is in the early 80s,
hmm,
41 years ago, when the value of the Nigerian naira was worth more than the US dollar. Okay, and so they had no business borrowing the money from the United States. Their economy or their currency was worth more,
yep,
and they could have bailed themselves out if they really wanted to. So that's
yes,
what happened there. And as you said, Shagari was defeated, and the people under him and all the other elected officials were stealing from that time, and that was the beginning of Nigeria's Wahala.
hmm,
Really was economic. They had those coups before that in the 60s and the 70s, and then the Biafran Civil War, what really brought Nigeria down was what happened in the 80s and the 90s. And then under this, one of his successors, Buhari overthrew him, uh, the last president. So he was a military leader, but we're going to talk about who overthrew Buhari. Ibrahim Babangida, IBB. He instituted a Nigerian version of the structural adjustment rather than have it imposed by the IMF. And as I told you in our last video on this, this was more of a public relations move so that Nigerians could save face and avoid looking like a beggar nation. But they still got their debts refinanced and rescheduled. And payment was not due until 91, and the World Bank monitored, not the International Monetary Fund. This crippled the economy, and millions fell into poverty. And this is the start of the mass exodus of professionals, aka the brain drain, that's ongoing to this very day. You said the UK got more doctors than Nigerian doctors than Nigeria does. You know, reduction of government spending, especially on social services and utilities. The Nigerian Power of Electric Power Authority became never expect power always because it never produced power. Okay, more often than not, you're gonna have a power outage than actual power being produced. Healthcare and education declined, and many public companies were privatized. Uh, this is so-called was supposed to stimulate foreign investments, but foreigners weren't in. You want to talk about IBB real quick? Or start with
IBB. I grew up when I was growing up in the. I moved to Abuja in 1989 with my family, and once we got to Abuja, IBB was in power until I believe 1993.
okay.
And during IBB's time, I was young. I was very young, but what I can remember is that the people were, it was the military era, so it was like a dictatorship. My parents were very quiet. Their friends, nobody really complained about anything. You just had to take it how it was. You really couldn't complain about any injustice that you faced. The military was brute. The military referred to civilians as bloody civilians. The military was like we're like God, and they still have that culture till this day, but it's a little bit reduced compared to what it was. But as far as the value of the naira, I remember in 1992 thereabout, the naira lost its value and was exchanging for 72 naira to $1. That was the first time I really heard my parents complaining about, oh wow, the US dollars, um, the naira has dropped in value, and and stuff like that. And then fast forward in 1993, IBB robbed MKO Abiola of an election. Now, I'm not even saying if MKO Abiola had won that election, he would have magically transformed Nigeria into paradise. I believe that wouldn't have happened. But this guy blatantly robbed Abiola of the elections, put him in prison, and Abiola lost his life in prison. He died. He never came out of prison. That was around the same time Fela Kuti was also locked up a couple of times. He ended up falling sick. He lost his life. Fela Kuti was very outspoken against the military regimes in Nigeria, from IBB to Obasanjo and the rest of them. So the memories that I have of IBB were simply wrecking the economy, instilling fear, turning the people into fearful people. Nobody could express themselves. IBB would literally wake up and set a decree like, okay, from today going forward, all journalists have to stop reporting on government issues, and nobody dares go against such decrees. If you do, you're going to lose your life, or you would end up in prison. I remember it was during IBB's time, or sorry, Sani Abacha's time also, that an environmental activist, Ken Saro-Wiwa, was sentenced to death
Right.
because the Niger Delta area where he was from, was completely destroyed by the oil exploration actions of Shell, BP, Mobil, and Chevron oil companies. So this guy staged the protest, and for the first time in the history of Shell's operations in Nigeria, they stopped operations for 3 days. So Sani Abacha, now I've skipped forward. This is Sani Abacha, not IBB. And just so you know, Sani Abacha took over from IBB because IBB found Sani Abacha as an extreme loyalist. Sani Abacha had many opportunities to stage a coup against IBB, but he never did. So IBB developed a lot of trust for Sani Abacha, but Sani Abacha was pretty much the worst. In my opinion, Sani Abacha is the second worst leader in Nigerian history after Buhari. So yeah, I don't have any good memories of those guys. Like I said, I was living in the capital, Abuja, and in Abuja back in the days, it was good. You know, it was really, really good. We had 24-hour electricity, 24-hour running water, clean water coming out from the taps. The roads were awesome. We had traffic lights working. We had regular infrastructure. I mean, each time I traveled down south to Lagos, Lagos was an eyesore. It was horrible, but Abuja was okay, very, very good. And then fast forward to 2023, if you compare the level of deterioration of Abuja from what it was 30 years ago when I was growing up there, oh, it's a lot of difference. So yeah, that's all I have to say about IBB. Nothing positive. It was just another tyrant. And the craziest part about this is IBB never paid for those crimes that he committed. And today, he is referred to as an elder statesman in Nigeria. How crazy.
Um, so let me go on to uh, Obasanjo. He was the first elected president under the so-called fourth Republic of Nigeria. He had been a military dictator in the 70s, and apparently he reformed himself. He had got in prison under Obasanjo, not Obasanjo, but under Sani Abacha. And once Abacha died, he was released from prison. Um, and he ran under the People's Democratic Party, or the PDP, in 1999. And so we're under this current regime, the last 24 years of debt. So what Obasanjo, he's money known for economic growth in Nigeria, uh, and canceling a lot of the debts, getting the debts paid off. So
I,
economic
I,
growth.
I need to chip in if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So, Obasanjo emerging as the president in 1999 was also as a result of the Northerners trying to appease the southwest of Nigeria, the Yoruba ethnic group. Because what had happened was when MKO Abiola died in prison as a result of the Northerners basically locking him up and killing him in prison, the Yorubas began threatening to succeed out of Nigeria. And Bola Tinubu was one of those outspoken Yoruba politicians clamoring for succession through Nadeko. So in 1999, once Obasanjo was sentenced to death, he was supposed to be killed in prison by Sani Abacha. But once Abacha died and he came out of prison, they felt like it was the right thing to do to give power to the southwest region of Nigeria just to, douse the anger with Nigeria. So if you think about it in essence, the democratic system has never really existed because it was always a choice thing. People didn't really vote to your votes didn't really count because they would have made the selections from the top. If you understand what I'm saying. Yeah, so I just wanted to put that in.
All right. Well, it's the same thing here. I mean, it's not as naked and blatant. But okay, so I'm going to go on keep theme with Obasanjo. Um,
Economic growth.
economic growth allowed him to pay off the country's foreign debts. He struck a deal with the Paris Club, as you said. It is a consortium of European countries that Nigeria owed $30 billion to. Nigeria would pay off 12.4 billion that it owed in exchange for the remainder being written off. So under his leadership, the nation's total debt uh, had been reduced to 5 billion owed to the World Bank and other creditors. And by the time he left office, Nigeria's foreign debt was 2.11 billion. So I mean, that was a huge, huge accomplishment. I mean, he
Yes.
basically went around with hat in hand, campaigning, begging, pleading to get those debts reduced. And that was also, like I was saying, around the Jubilee. That also was timing was everything because the world was really, we were going into the new millennium. People were optimistic. The Soviet Union had fallen. America was the only superpower at that time, and so people feel the Western powers were feeling generous. China wasn't what it is
No.
today. It was just basically the sweatshop of the world at that point. Okay, it was starting to come to its own, but little did we know that they had a plan, a grand strategy to take over Africa. Since Obasanjo left, he had three successors. Um, if you don't count Bola Tinubu, who just got sworn in last week, earlier this week. Um, Omuro Yar'Adua, Goodluck Jonathan, and Muhammadu Buhari ran up Nigeria's foreign debt in the 13 years since Obasanjo got in office. Yar'Adua increased his debt by $3.5 billion in 3 years. He was often sickly and absent from office, so I mean, so he was able. His government basically ran on autopilot. Jonathan, who was his vice president, spent the last 2 years of his term and then had uh, uh, 4 years of his own, or 1 year. Spent the last year of his term and had 4 years of his own. So he was president for 5 years. In that time, the debt accelerated by 24% and foreign debt, and he wound up owing Nigeria because of his mismanagement, winding up owing 7.3 billion. So you can see it doubled from your Ottawa to Jonathan, and triple from Obasanjo to Jonathan.
Hmm.
But when Buhari takes the cake, I mean, 10 times as much debt. 11,
Yep.
by the time he left office last week, Nigeria owed this foreign debt
Yep.
$33.62 billion. I mean, he spent the last 2 weeks in the administration running up the debt even further. Like he said,
Yep.
he asked for another 800 billion in Naira spending. You on your way out the door, man. Why are you asking for more money? Why are you going to leave this hole for your successor? He didn't care. He's riding off and he live in Niger or somewhere near there.
Yep.
He doesn't care.
Simple. He just never cared. And because guys like Buhari are very aware of the fact that you can commit crimes as a politician and you're not going to be held accountable. Even when people try to hold you accountable, they are most likely, most definitely not going to be successful. So he did what he had to do. He was so blatant with it that a week to his passing down power to the next person, he applied for another loan from the World Bank, $800 million for nothing. And everybody was complaining about it, but nothing could be done about it. So, I mean, it will be nice to see these guys end up in Kirikiri prison or in Kuje prison in Abuja or in Panti prison in Lagos. That would be good, but I highly doubt that would happen. But we are going to continue talking about it until, more people have the ability to hold them accountable, until the institutions are not as weak as they are. Because right now we have no institutions. The institutions in Nigeria literally have no powers to do nothing. It's only against poor people they can do stuff. But the rich, powerful people and the politicians are immune. That's just how it works. So yeah.
Right. So that's Nigeria. Um, you're down to 2 billion, and now you back up to 33 billion. I mean, it's insane. I mean, you're talking about 15 times where you left off over that. I want to go to East and Central Africa real quick. I'm going to go to Uganda, and they became the news. Their president Mussolini, he's also been there about 40 years. Um,
Hey, brother,
yeah,
sorry. Do you mind if I make a request?
yeah, go ahead.
Could we not make this longer than about an hour? Maybe an hour and 5 minutes, and we can
Okay, well, we can,
continue.
we can continue this
Yes.
later. We can stop right now because it's right at the hour mark.
Yes.
Okay, so there'll be part two. Stay tuned for part two.
Yes, 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 yes.
So
Part two will be much more better. As you can see, my brother, the black scholar, he's put in so much work to, to compile this information for everybody, just so you're aware of the intricacies going on in the African space as far as management of resources, debt and all that stuff, and why Africa is what it is. But we are slowly going to progress, and I really appreciate you, the Black Scholar, for putting this together.
Yeah. And I appreciate you for joining. It's been on your platform, so it's an honor to have you on mine. And I look forward to more in the future. I look forward to part 2 of Africa's debt
Yes,
crisis, and then I also look forward to when we do on your platform Africa's greatest leaders and why.
yes,
Right. All right,
yes,
brother. Take it easy.
yes. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.